Excellent, thank you. Okay. What happened here? Okay, good. All right, I can be heard. All right, good. If you loan somebody money and now they haven't paid, and so you want to take a mashkon. This isn't a mashkon collateral that's taken at the time of the loan, but it's later on. Later on, after the loan hasn't been paid, you want some security. So the lender is not allowed to take collateral except with the assistance of the bezdin, or with an agent of the rabbinical court. And he can't come into the house of the borrower in order to take the collateral. Who can't come? Well, Pashtus is that the creditor can't come. What about the agent of the bezdin? We'll see. That'll be a discussion in the Gemara. This is based on a pasuk in the Torah in Devarim. It says, "Bachutz ta'amod." You have to stand outside, and then the collateral is brought to the creditor from inside of the house to the creditor on the outside of the house. If the debtor has two utensils, one that he really needs to use every day, and the other is an extra, so every single day the creditor should take one of the utensils and leave the other utensil with the debtor. Similarly, if he took, let's say, a pillow, so he should return, or a cushion, he should return the pillow at night when the debtor needs it to sleep with. If he took collateral, he took a plow as collateral, so he should return the plow during the daytime when the plow is used. And if the debtor dies, so the halacha is that the requirement of losachvo, of not holding on to the collateral, only applies to the debtor himself, but not to the debtor's children. So then, at that point in time, the creditor would be allowed to hold on to the collateral even at night, during the daytime, whether it's a pillow, whether it's a plow, it wouldn't matter. The obligation to return it for the debtor's use is only to the debtor himself and not to his heirs. Shimon Gamliel Omer, Shimon Gamliel, from the heirs? Even if, yeah, because if the heirs are paying him, they're paying him from the estate of their father. Yeah. Shimon Gamliel Omer, Apa le'atzmo eino makser ela ad shloshim yom. Shimon Gamliel says that even to the debtor himself, the creditor is only obligated to return the items, nighttime items during the night and the daytime items during the day, up to 30 days. If the creditor still hasn't been paid and it's 30 days past the due date of the loan, so then he's allowed to sell the collateral in order to collect his funds. So then he's allowed to sell the collateral under the supervision of the bezdin in order to get repayment of his loan. Gemara says, "Amar Shmuel, shliach bezdin minasech nesuche in v'mashkune lo." So Shmuel says, and we paskin this way in sort of a limited sense. He says that if a creditor is collecting collateral as security, but it's not that the loan has necessarily come due, it's just he's afraid that when the loan does come due, he's not going to, the debtor's not going to have funds. So it's talking about collateral after the time of the loan, but not necessarily at the exact time of repayment. So Shmuel says that in such a case, the shliach bezdin is allowed to grab an item of collateral in the marketplace. He could grab away from the hands of the debtor the item of a mashkune lo, but he's not allowed. Even the agent of the bezdin is not allowed to enter into the debtor's house. Is that true? But doesn't the Mishnah say that the creditor, the malveh, is not allowed to take collateral unless he has the agent of the bezdin? But that implies that the agent of the bezdin can take collateral even by going into the debtor's house. So Amalei Shmuel So Shmuel can respond that no. What it means is that when you want to grab an item of collateral out of the hands of the debtor, even that should only be done by a shliach bezdin. However, even a shliach bezdin is not allowed to actually enter into the house of the debtor to grab collateral. So Shulchan Aruch, as I said, is a pshara. If it's for reassurance that the loan will be paid, this would be true. But we paskin that if it's actually past the due date of the loan, then at that point we would allow the shliach bezdin at least to enter into the premises of the debtor. That's the way that it's laid out in the Shulchan Aruch and Siman Sadi Zayid. So Hakinami Mistaba, Diktani Seifa. So this makes sense actually. This interpretation of Shmuel that even the Shliach Bezdin, at least initially, is not allowed to go into the house of the debtor because the Seifa says Leikanes Leveso Lito Mashkono. You're not allowed. He's not allowed. It's a pronoun, what we call a general pronoun. It says Lo Yikanes. He shouldn't go inside the house of the debtor to pick up the collateral. So who's he? Who is the he in the sentence? So money, we don't spell out the pronoun. So who's the he? So Elaim Abalchov, if it's talking about the creditor himself, so Meresha Shmamina. So it already said, we already were speaking about the creditor. We know about the creditor. Elalav, at this point in time, we're talking about what the Shliach Bezdin can do. So it must be when it says, so that means the Shliach Bezdin. So it says the Gemara, no. Area. That's not necessarily a proof of a Shmuel, because we can read the Mishnah as follows. We could say, some have the Lashon here, Chistui Mechzer v'Hachi Ketani, and some have the gears of Hachi Kamer. So we have the gears of Hachi Kamer, and the back gives you the other gears, and Tosfos mentions both gearsos. Amal v'eschavero loyim shchanenu ela bebezdin. That Michlal bebezdin mimashchanim. That when it says in the Reisha that the creditor is not allowed to go inside of the house, but rather you have to use the Bezdin. So the implication is that the Bezdin, the Shliach Bezdin, is allowed to go inside of the debtor's house. And then the continuation is talking about, and by the way, the creditor, not only is the creditor not allowed to enter into the debtor's house, but the creditor is not even allowed to grab an item out of the debtor's hands in the marketplace, even should he come across the debtor there, because it's like a gezerah. Gezerah, here we'll read from the Bach, Gezerah, Shemi Yikanis Lebeso Lito Mashkono, because we make a Gezerah that we don't allow the creditor even to grab an item out of the debtor's hands in the marketplace, because we're worried if we would allow him to do that, then maybe he'll come to violate the biblical prohibition of entering into his into the debtor's house and violating Bachutz Tamod. So Masiv of Yosef, so Rav Yosef asked the Kasha, it says in the Torah, that let's say that the debtor has a millstone. Where do people usually keep their millstones? Jack, where do you keep your millstone? Most people, they keep their millstones in their house. So you're not allowed to take the lower millstone. You're not allowed to take the upper millstone.
So in the farms outside, they have.
Sure, but it was but
I mean?
it was still on their premises.
When I think of a millstone, that's what I think.
But it's still on the premises. So Yaakov, but that's a good answer, Jack. But other things you would be allowed to take. You can't take the millstone of the debtor, but the implication is you can go that the creditor would be allowed to enter into the house. Or at least somebody would be allowed to enter into the house to take something. You can't take as collateral the beged, the clothing of a widow, but you would be allowed to take the clothing of somebody who's not a widow. So who is this talking about? These psukim, who is it going on? Is it saying that the creditor is allowed to go into the house as long as he's not taking of the debtor, as long as he's not taking the millstone or the clothing of a widow? Man. If it's talking about the creditor, we have an explicit lav. Not only does it say but we have a pasuk that says explicitly, he's not allowed to enter into the house of the debtor. And a lav shliach bezdin. Rather, it must be talking about the shliach bezdin. So we see, even though the shliach bezdin can't take the millstone, even though the shliach bezdin is not allowed to take the clothing of an almana, but he is allowed to enter into the debtor's house to take other things. So this would seem to be a kasha on Shmuel. So Tirgama Rav Papa Breder of Nachman. So the Rav Papa says, no problem. I'll give you the explanation. So Tirgama Rav Papa Breder of Nachman Kamei Rav Yosef. The Amila, some have a version that this was Rav Papa Breder of Yosef, Kamei Rav Yosef, that he said this in front of his father. The Olam Bebal Chov. That this is talking about a Baal Chov. He's the only one who's not allowed to enter into the house in order to take the millstone, in order to take the widow's clothing, and he's not allowed to take anything for that matter. But if he would take the millstone or he would take the widow's clothing, so then he would violate not just one prohibition, but two prohibitions. But if I'm dealing with a shliach bezdin would be allowed to enter into the debtor's house. So Tashma, Mimashma Shenemar, we'll try to bring another proof text. It says, Bachutz ta'amod, so any odea that the debtor, that the creditor has to wait outside for his collateral to be brought to him. I'll take your question in a second, Eddie. Let's just get to the next page. So obviously, if the creditor is standing outside, he can't bring the collateral to himself. So obviously, the debtor is going to have to bring the collateral to him. That's sort of obvious. I don't need that to be spelled out. That's 2 + 2 = 4. So why then does it say explicitly, oh, the man's going to bring it out? Of course, the man has to bring it out. It means another man. Who's the man? The man is the Shliach Bezdin. That's so it means that even that the Shliach Bezdin has the right to enter into the premises of the debtor to bring out the collateral. The Rabba Shliach Bezdin. The Ma'ila Shliach Bezdin Kalover. Does that not imply that the Shliach Bezdin is inside the house, just like the lover, just like the debtor is inside the house, and just like the debtor can bring out the collateral from his house, so too the Shliach Bezdin can enter into the debtor's house to bring out the collateral. So that would seem to be a proof against Shmuel. So we turn the page here and. Sorry? Let's turn the page. Below, Shliach Bezdin Kemalve. No, when it says L'Rabba Shliach Bezdin, it means that it's going on Bachutz Tamod. No, that's the Ish, Ish, the number one, Bachutz Tamod, that the creditor stands outside. And you know who else stands outside? Ish. The Shliach Bezdin also stands outside. That the only one who's entitled to be in the house is the debtor, and the debtor brings out the collateral. He could bring out the collateral to the Shliach Bezdin. He could bring out the collateral to the Malveh, but the Shliach Bezdin would not necessarily have the right to enter into the debtor's premises, as Shmuel says. Yes, Eddie, what's the question?
Yeah.
Two psukim. So our number one, you have the lab lo savo beso labot avotom. That's lab number one, and lab number two would be lo sachabo beged almana, if the creditor is taking the clothing of an almana, and lab number two, in the case of a millstone, if the creditor grabs the millstone away from the debtor's property, would be lo yachabo rechayim barachim. So those would be the two labin. It would be lo savo el beso labot avotom number one, plus one of these additional labin in the event that the creditor is taking either the millstone or the clothing of a widow from the debtor. Okay, got it? Excellent. Tashma, first line of Kuf Gimel Amud Beis. So let's try this again. If it says that if you happen to take collateral, or you took the clothing of your fellow who is a debtor, so then you have to return it to him while he needs it. So b'shliach bezdin akastam medaber. The pasuk's talking about a shliach bezdin. Shliach bezdin took the collateral and has to return it. How do I know it's talking about the shliach bezdin? Maybe it's talking about the creditor himself who took the collateral. No, Kishu Omer, when it says the creditor can't enter into the debtor's premises, lo savo beso labot avoto, he can't go. Amor. So that's talking about the Baal Chov, and that pasuk is talking about the creditor. So then, what is the pasuk talking about when it says, "Oh, if you take the collateral," which means it sounds like somebody's going inside. It can't be the creditor. So b'shliach bezdin akastam medaber. It's talking about the shliach bezdin. So here, this seems to indicate very strongly against Shmuel that the shliach bezdin is in fact allowed to enter into the premises of the debtor. So we say, you know what? It's a Tanai. Tanai, Shmuel holds like one Tana, and this is going like the other Tana. Okay, so let's talk about which are the two versions of the Tanaim saying either that the Shliach Bezdin is allowed to enter into the debtor's premises to take the collateral, or the Shliach, but even the Shliach Bezdin is not allowed to enter into the debtor's premises to take the collateral. The Tanya, like it's obvious, the creditor can't enter into the debtor's premises to take the collateral. That's the pasuk in the Torah. Tanya, the Brisa says, Shliach Bezdin, Sheba Lamashkina, Lo Yikanes Leveso. This sounds a lot like Shmuel. So we hold this way, as I said, at least if the due date of the loan hasn't taken place yet. Lo Yikanes Leveso, he's not allowed to enter into the premises of the creditor, Lamashkina, rather, Shliach Bezdin also stands politely outside. And the debtor, Motzi Lo Mashkon, takes the collateral out of his house. Shenema b'chutz ta'amod, as it says that he stands outside. Sounds like even the shliach bezdin v'aish, and the not only should the creditor stand outside, but also v'aish, but also the shliach bezdin stands outside. The Tanya Yidak and the other brisa, which it would be going not like Shmuel, says ba'chov sheba l'mashkeno lo yikanes leveso l'mashkeno. The ba'chov, the creditor himself, that wants to take collateral from the debtor because he's worried the debtor isn't going to be paying him. So he's not allowed to enter into his house to take collateral. Rather, he stands outside. When the other one comes in, umotzi lo mashkono, and brings him his mashkon, meaning the debtor says, wait for me, I'm going to go inside my house to bring you a mashkon, and brings him out the mashkon, shenemar, and the Brisa goes on to say, Ushliach Bezdin, Shabal the Mashno, but Ushliach Bezdin, on the other hand, who is taking collateral from the debtor on behalf of the creditor, is allowed to enter into the home of the debtor. Hareza Niklas Leveso, Umim Mashkino. So this Brisa, the second Brisa, is clearly not going like a Shmuel, unless we say it's talking about different points in time, as we mentioned earlier, whether the loan has become due yet or not. And now let's talk about some of the other dinim. When you do take, let's say the Shliach Bezdin comes in and he does take collateral from the debtor, so there are certain things he's not allowed to take. He's not allowed to take dvarim like kalim, utensils that are utilized she'osim ochel nepesh for, let's say, like the frying pan to make an egg in the morning. He can't take the kalim that are necessary for to prepare for the preparation of food for the debtor to be able to eat. That you have to leave with the debtor. Not only that, you also have to leave the debtor with a bed. For no saying mita, umita. And not only that, you got to leave the debtor with a second bed. One bed's not enough. You got to have at least two beds. Umatza, and you also leave him with a blanket. Ba'ashir, if he's a rich man gets a blanket. Mita, let's say he's a poor man. He's a poor man, so he also gets a bed. And he also gets a second bed. Poor man or rich man, poor man. They both get two beds. Umapat's the ani, but an ani doesn't get the fancy blanket. He just gets a mat. Okay, lo about lowly ishto. There's an obligation to provide for the debtor's basic needs, but not for the basic needs of his wife. If there is the bedding that the wife has, so that he's allowed to take. The wife has a blanket, take the blanket. The wife has a mat, take the blanket. Below Levana Velibnosev. And if the sons and the daughters who live there have beds and blankets and mats, so the creditor is allowed to take those as well. The only thing that he has to leave something for the debtor himself. That's a special halacha in the Torah. You got to leave something for the debtor himself, as we'll discuss. How do I know that? So this says, how do I know I have to leave something that I have to be what we call misadrin? I have to set up the house so that the debtor will still be able to live. I'll have to leave something for him. How do I know? So he says, well, we say, the same way in which you do this for a debtor, so too, you do this when a person makes a donation of his value or somebody else's value to the Beis Hamikdash. He says the person's objective value, their erech, whatever that is, it changes based on how old the person is and so forth. So whatever that value is, for let's say 50 shkalim for a man between 20 and 60. So let's say that a person makes that donation to the Beis Hamikdash, but he doesn't have enough money to pay for it, or he won't have anything left over. So then we evaluate how much assets he has, and we leave for him the bare minimum that he needs in order to subsist. So the same way we do this for a debtor, we do this in the case of Erchin. So it says the Gemara, wait a second. The pasuk that says that we take care of it appears with respect to Erchin. It says, if he's too poor for his valuation, so then we derive from that we're supposed to keep him alive despite the amount that he pledged to the Beis Hamikdash. We have to leave him with what he needs. That's the Gzeras HaKasav that appears by Erchin. So therefore, Klape Laya, we have it the other way around. In other words, we derive the rule in the case of the debtor from the case of Erchin. So let's try this again. This is where the Torah has the principle that you're supposed to leave a little bit of something for the person who made the pledge. So rather, the way that we derive it in the case of the Bachov is learned from the case of Erchin. The same way we provide for the pleasure when he, in the case of Erchin, kak misadrin ba'achov, so too we provide for the debtor in the case of a debtor who owes money for a loan to the creditor. So Amamar, what did we say over here? We said in the Brisa, yes.
Why would someone make a pledge to the Beis Hamikdash if he has nothing to fulfill the pledge with?
Oh my goodness, have you been watching anything in the Jewish community for the last century? People make pledges all the time because they want to believe or they want to appear like they're able to take care of the communal needs, and they want to be a gevir, but sometimes their aspirations are greater than the reality. So people make pledges all the time, yeshiva, shuls, and so forth, and they say, "I'm going to give $1 million." Then it turns out that they didn't actually have $1 million. It happens. It happens.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm a no say mita umatza. I mean, I don't mean to be harsh. I'm just saying, but dealing from a Bezdin perspective, I sometimes have these cases where, like a show says, hey, this person donated, a large contribution. We were counting on it, and the person said, well, I don't have it. They said, well, why did you donate it? Well, I was hoping I would have it. So I'm a mar no said mita umita umatza the ashir. A person gives so you have to leave for a rich man. You have to leave one bed plus a second bed plus a blanket. Mita mapet honey, and you leave a one bed and a second bed and a mat for a poor person. It's laman. So Elaim Ishto. So why do you need a second bed? Why do you need a second bed? How many beds do you need to sleep on in an average night? Right? Usually one bed is sufficient. So why do you need a second bed? Elaim Ishto, you say, no, you need the second bed for the wife, or maybe for the children. They say, no, we already said we don't leave anything for the wife and the children. That's not the Xeris Akasa. It doesn't say Hachayeo, the wife and the children. You don't have to leave for them. So why the second bed? No, we assume that the person himself, the debtor, needs two beds. Tarti lamali. Why does he need two beds? He needs one bed to eat on. And the second one that he's going to eat on. Because, how are you going to have breakfast in bed if you don't have the bed? So you got to have like a bed in which you can have your meal. People would recline, basically on beds in the olden days to eat. Shmuel says that it's important that after you eat, you move from the place that you eat to where you're going to sleep, because it's very unhealthy to eat and then to go straight to sleep without walking a little bit. So therefore, we have two beds. They're a little distance from each other. This way, the person, if he eats on one bed, so then he'll have to walk a little bit to the next bed. It'll be healthier. And we want the person to be healthy. Komili Adana Asusai, he says, he was a doctor, Shmuel. I know how to cure anything except for like three things I can't really cure. The Bama honey tlas. You better avoid these three things because I won't be able to cure them. Shmuel says, even EJ wouldn't have been able to cure this. Okay, says Manda Achila Hina Mariva. If somebody eats like a bitter date, okay, they eat a bitter date, forget it. Aliba Rekana, when they have an empty stomach. A bitter date with an empty stomach, Jack, avoid. Umanda also the asa misna the kiss number tiva chartse. Or a person wears a wet linen belt around his loins, also very bad idea. Umanda achel nama, and then finally, and this is one that pertains to our sugya, somebody who eats, they eat their bread, lamaski apagamidi, and then they don't walk 4 hours afterwards. You got to walk a little bit after your meal. So that's why we want the person to have two beds. So Tani Tanakameh to Rav Nachman, Kederach She Misadrin Be'erchin, Kak Misadrin Be'bal Chob. So now Atana said what we just learned in the second brisa, the same way that you provide basic needs. So a person made a pledge to the base of Mikdash of an individual's objective value in Erchin. So too, according to the Xeris Akasa, we do the same thing with respect to providing for a debtor. So Amalei, so Rav Nachman said, I don't really get that. After a certain amount of time, we're going to sell the collateral. If we're going to sell collateral, so then it certainly doesn't make sense that we're going to actually leave him with provisions, because at a certain point in time, you don't even have to return the collateral anymore. I'm going to have like these pillows and these beds and whatever. And at a certain point, the plow, I don't even have to return it at a certain point. I can sell it. So I leave it in his possession altogether. It doesn't make sense. So wait, is that true? Where does it say that you sell the goods? It means it says in the Mishnah simply, at least the Tanakama just says that if you have a pillow, you return the pillow at night. You have a plow, you return the plow during the day. But it's not an accident, it's a Kabbalah. So he says, no, this Tana that was reciting his teaching in front of Rav Nachman was going like the latter opinion in our Mishnah. Tanaka Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, he was going like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, Tana Kameh, Vachi Kamaleh. And he said, and he was saying that Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says that after, since he was saying the version of Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, Rav Nachman was retorting and saying that it doesn't make any sense, because according to Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, the Mishnah says after 30 days, the creditor is allowed to sell the collateral altogether. So if he's allowed to sell it altogether, it doesn't make sense that he would leave it in the. How do you leave it in the debtor's possession if you're going to have the right to sell it altogether? So do him says to Tanan, because what did the Mishnah say? It's Chayzer. That you only have to return the collateral, like the plow during the daytime and the pillow at night, to the debtor for 30 days. Afterwards, you're allowed to sell it in Bezdin. So that it's not necessarily a proof. It could be that when Shimon Gamliel says to sell, he doesn't mean sell everything. Maybe what he meant was that up until 30 days, so you return basically everything according to the prior usage of the debtor from Mikan Me'elach, but then afterwards you calculate how much does the debtor really need. It was a very fancy cloak that you're returning to the debtor to wear every single day. Maybe you could sell the fancy cloak. It's worth like $100. And if out of $80, the creditor will collect $80 of what's owed to him. And for the remaining $20, he'll buy a more inexpensive cloak, which is more fitting for the means and the circumstances of the debtor. Maybe that's what it means. We say you don't need $100 outfit. I'll sell it and I'll keep $80, and then $20 I'll buy a less fancy outfit for you. So we say no, because Rabbi Shimon Gamliel never would have said that. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says to sell, it means he's selling everything, because according to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, there's no such thing as a person saying to a person, oh, the cloak that you were wearing was too fancy for you. I'm going to give you one which is more befitting of your circumstances, because every single member of Klal Yisrael, no matter how poor, is fit to be dressed up like a king, according to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel couldn't have held by this rationale, we're going to sell the amount that the fellow doesn't need and only leave for him that which he needs. Because according to Shimon Gamliel, every member of the Jewish people needs the fanciest and richest of items. The Amar Abaye said there are four personalities, 4 to 9, that held that all the Jewish people are considered to be princes and princesses. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Akiva, Kulu, Sviva Lahu, Kol Yisrael b'nei Malachim. All of the Jewish people are considered to be b'nei Malachim. They're not only Jewish American princes or princesses, but wherever they are, all Jews, regardless of where they're located, they're all princes and princesses. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, the Tanai, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says that, for example, we have on Shabbos is a question of what are you allowed to carry? You're only allowed to carry foods on Shabbos that are roy lachila. I can't carry like raw flour on Shabbos because I can't eat raw flour on Shabbos. It's going to be muktzah, right? So what about if I have like a raw type of onion? It's a type of onion that's like fenugreek. It's called a luf. If it's not cooked and it's basically raw, so it's not eligible to be eaten. So therefore, the Mishnah says that there's no, you're not allowed to carry it. It's muktzah on Shabbos, not lois aluf, lois akardom. And similarly, if I have raw mustard that hasn't been properly ground yet, so that also is not eligible to be eaten, and therefore it's muktzah. However, Shimon Gamliel matzah b'luf. Shimon Gamliel says that there's this luf, this onion type, the fenugreek, you are allowed to carry because it is edible, not for human beings, but for ravens. But who in the world has ravens other than like Edgar Allan Poe? So we say, so rich people have ravens. Okay, apparently that was like a thing. That was a thing. You were rich, so you say, hey, you want to see my ravens? That was like a sign of, maybe like in Baltimore, whatever. Shumakala Orvin. Because this is considered to be a food that's fit for a raven. And since every single Jew is fit to be a rich man who can own a raven, and in fact, the ravens were owned by a Jew, right? Right? Isn't the owner of the ravens a Jew? Yeah, right. Okay. So therefore, it's something which is right for every single Jew to own ravens, and they can therefore carry food which can be eaten by ravens. So that's Rabbi Shimon Gamliel's opinion, even if the person himself is not rich. So Rabbi Shimon does not. Rabbi Shimon also holds that every Jew is considered to be a prince or princess. That's not b'nei malachim. If the people are princes or princesses, so then on Shabbos they're allowed to rub themselves with oil from a rose, sakin shemen vard, rose oil. They're allowed to rub rose oil, which was considered to be non-viscous. It's considered to be very liquidy. Agabe makosen b'Shabbos on their wounds, even though there's a prohibition of doing things for refuah on Shabbos. Nonetheless, since it's something that they would do during the week, even if they didn't have a wound, it doesn't look like refuah. They would do this during a weekday too, because that's what rich people do. And Rabbi Shimon says Therefore, any Jewish person is allowed to rub rose oil on a wound because all Jews are considered to be like royalty, and therefore it's something that's fitting for any Jew to do, even if they wouldn't have a wound during the week, to rub themselves with rose oil. Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Akiva go together, and they say what? The Tanya the Brisa says, Hooray, and this is more our territory. Hooray, shall you know Shimo Elef Zuz. Let's say that a debtor owed 1,000 zuz, okay, $1,000. Ulavush itzala bas mea money, and they have a and they have an itzala. They have an itzala which is worth, let's say, 100 money. It's worth like I don't know, 100,000. What? An itztala is like a very fancy jacket, okay, like a very fancy cloak. Okay, so they have an itztala which is like super, super fancy. It's worth like mea money, 100 times of a money. So mafshitin mimenu malbishim also itztala haruuyalo. So we take it away from him and we sell it. And with the proceeds, we'll end up with our 1,000 zuz, with 1,000 zuz that belongs to the creditor, and we tell him you can wear an itztala that's not worth like 100,000 zuz, whatever. It's not worth an enormous amount of money, and you'll wear an itztala which is more fitting for your circumstances. Betana mishum Rabbi Yishmael, betana mishum Rabbi Akiva. However, the Tana says in the name of Rabbi Yishmael and also in the name of Rabbi Akiva, not true, because the itztala that was worth mea money is really fitting for this individual. It's an individual who is down on his luck. That's why he can't pay back his loans. So say, no, call Yisrael Ru'uya the Oso Itztala. Every single Jew is worthy of this itztala, is worthy of this fancy cloak, because the fanciest clothing is something which is appropriate for every single member of the Jewish nation. So therefore, we see that they also hold the call Yisrael b'nei malachim heim. Well, the Ma'ida Salak Adaitin Meikara. So this original assumption that we wanted to say, according to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, until we rejected it because he holds the Kol Yisrael b'nei malachim heim, we wanted to say the Yav le my dechazi le my zebninan my delochazi le, that we're going to sell that which is too big for his breaches that he doesn't really need, and then just use some of the proceeds to pay back the creditor, and with the remaining we'll buy something smaller that's more befitting to the means of the debtor. So I understand in the Mishnah we spoke about the case of after 30 days you'll sell the pillow or the cushion, or you'll sell the plow, right, the macharesha. So I understand that in the case of the cushions, so there are big cushions, there are small cushions. So bishlam akarva kesis, I have a pillow or a cushion. So chazile the beni. So I can have like a fancy cushion, I can have a less fancy cushion. So I sell the fancy cushion and I give and I buy a less fancy cushion for the debtor, and with the remaining proceeds I pay the creditor. But when it comes to a plow, there was only really one model of a plow. A plow is a plow. You don't have fancy plows and less fancy plows. You just have plows. So what does it mean? I'm going to sell a fancy plow and give him a less fancy plow. So I'm a Rava Barabba. So Rava Barabba says, yes, there is such a thing. We're talking about not a plow that you would use to plow the ground, but rather a plow. It was called a plow, but it was really a comb that a person used to groom himself. And then there are different sizes. There are fancy combs to groom yourself. There are like silver combs, macharesha, the kaspa. That's what we're talking about. And then you could buy like a copper or less fancy comb in return, and use the remaining proceeds to pay the creditor. So Rav Chaga was having trouble with this entire concept. Why doesn't the creditor just say, hey, wait a second, why do I have this responsibility that especially if you hold like Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva, says Tosas, the kasha is really going on them. You say, call Yisrael b'nei malachim heim. Why should it be my responsibility to see that the person is able to keep like the fanciest of clothing and so forth? So Amalei Abaye, yeah, Ibaleh Karami, it is your responsibility, because to the degree that the Torah says you could take collateral, you have to take collateral in such a way in which you treat the other person charitably and you enable them to keep whatever their basic needs are. And if they're used to fancy clothing, so it could be that you're obligated even to allow them to keep the fancy clothing, Mishim Shenemar, because it says with respect to the creditor that hashev tashivlo, you got to return the collateral for the person to use. Ulachati at tzedakah, because you have an obligation to act charitably towards him. And we'll stop here. Okay, everybody have a great day.